Oh, that's sexy.
Nice.
Can you dial it down? Perfect. Oh yeah, no, it's good. I like the half Taylor's dummy in the background. That's nice.
That adds something to it.
That's deeply confusing and has nothing to do with comic books.
It's the Bifrost, and it's episode 4 with Blake and Sean, and who could ask for more? And then, what? Oh, Sean ain't in this one? Who would I got then? What's that dude's name? I can't rhyme with that. Let me see a picture of him. Okay. Let me see what I can come up with. Hang on. Let me try something. It's the Bifrost, and it ain't trash. Check out this dude with a funky mustache. Now that's it, man. That's all I got. I can't think of nothing else, man. Look, I gotta go. I got like five, 6 gigs today. Look, man, call my manager, man. He's the one who booked this shit. I don't know what the hell's going on. You give me one name one time, and then all of a sudden it's not that name no more. Hey, man, I gave you that mustache line, okay? That mustache line is gold. If you can't spin that into some good shit, then that's not my problem. I gotta go. I got like 20 gigs.
No, I like it. It's let people be baffled by our Addams Family style living arrangements. If a live tiger comes through, don't be alarmed.
Oh no, that's awesome. So everyone is here today joining us, and we have the wonderful David Avallone with me, the incredible famous writer who I am super excited to chat with. That's awesome. Well, having the animals and all that stuff around the house is part and parcel with being a writer. You're just immersed in your own little universe, right? So I did a little research and found out that you live in Hollywood. Is that right?
I do. If I walk out the front door and turn to my left, I'm looking at the sign.
What? Okay.
And I live about, every cave you've ever seen on every television show ever. It's called Bronson Caves. It's the entrance to the Bat Cave in the 1960s Batman.
Right.
It's every cave on every planet on Star Trek. It's in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Search. That's about a block and a half away.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is so exciting. You must get so many cool like celebrity sightings and kind of ideas for stories. Tell me what is the coolest thing about living in Hollywood?
It's the thing that people complain about is also the coolest thing. People say, every waiter's got a screenplay is the old cliche. It's like, yeah, how terrible that the whole city is full of creative people trying to do creative stuff. Like, what a bummer.
Yeah.
Like I never get that as a problem. But yeah, it's the neighborhood I live in. I flatter myself that I live in a 2-bedroom apartment. I am not someone of wealth or power, but I appreciate the famous people that live around here because they have chosen this over Beverly Hills, which is the douchebag place to live when you have a lot of money.
Exactly.
But yeah,
I imagine though that your networking there must be incredible. Your opportunity for networking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have a whole thing about networking. I think people largely, this is something that I tell up and comers in any creative industry. People misunderstand networking, I think, as trying to forge connections to get jobs. Networking, when you do it right, is just making friends.
Yeah.
Because people always say, oh, they only hire their friends, or everybody likes to work with people they like. That's not a bad thing. So if it's all who you know, here's a crazy idea. Go out and know people.
Yeah.
Be interesting, add value to their life rather than having your resume staple gun to your forehead. Help me.
Yes.
As an aside, when I met KEVIN EASTMAN at Emerald City in March of 2015, I was a brand new comic book writer. I did not have a thought in my head about he can benefit my career.
Right.
And again, frankly, I'm not a rabid Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles super fan. I liked it at the time. I read the comics. I've never really seen the cartoon show or anything like that. So he sat down next to me at a bar and we started talking, and we talked about comic books we like.
Right.
Not comics I've written or he's written and drawn, but we actually talked about World War II comics from the 70s.
Wow.
Because we both grew up reading those and loving them.
Right.
And from there, we developed a friendship. We discovered we had a lot of friends in common. And in spite of our very different careers, we had a lot of experiences in common. But the point being, I didn't look at him and see dollar signs. I saw, oh, he's a nice guy, you
Right.
know. And luckily, he is a nice guy. He's the nicest guy in comics. But
So is that the first time you met
so
him?
you live in this world and you socialize with these people, and you aren't a jerk and you aren't pushy, and
Right.
you develop the friendships over time. As you asked about the funniest thing about the neighborhood, there's a movie theater out here called the ArcLight, which has a big, beautiful theater called the Cinerama Dome.
Okay.
And me and my wife are freaks who sit in the front row of the biggest movie, maybe the biggest movie theater in the world. One time, we always like opening night, we get front row seats at the Dome, which is insane. One night, we tried to get seats front row of the Dome, and they were taken. So we had to sit off to the side, and we're sitting off to the side waiting for the movie to start. And Christopher Nolan and his enormous family comes and sits in our seats.
Oh, wow.
And I went, oh, so that's who we're competing for these seats every.
Right.
And once a few months later, we did sit in those seats and looked off, and Christopher Nolan and his family were off to the side. And he's like, oh, damn you, Avallone, taking my seats. But yeah, that's the ridiculousness of living in Hollywood.
That's awesome. What a great story. Well, now you know, like you're out, you're mingling. Like you said, I think a lot of it isn't so much networking or whatever. It's just having a good time, making friends. People get a sense of the type of person you are when you hang out, and
Right.
you know what kind of experiences you share, the way you look at the world. That all comes across when you are, you know, hanging out with people. And it's just getting those opportunities is priceless.
Yeah.
I mean, this weekend I just got back from New York Comic Con, where I got to meet you for the first time in person. It was absolutely incredible. And I'm blown away because I am typically in my house. I'm, you know, writing. I'm in my little universe. I don't get out into visit a lot with like the big cities. And so getting to New York was such an eye-opening experience for me.
Sure.
You know, New York Comic Con is massive. And I met so many incredible people. And it was interesting how many are just, they're so down to earth. So like having dinner with like Jim Lee. He's just so funny and down to earth.
He's a lovely man. I've only met him once, but he is a very, very sweet guy.
Oh my gosh, so nice and incredibly down to earth. And I just love that there's so many people in comics that are just such salt of the earth, amazing, funny, intelligent, you know, people. And I was there most of the time with Sean Gordon Murphy and his wife, which were hilarious and so much fun and just party animals. They're like the rock stars in comics. So
Yeah.
Getting to hang out with them was priceless. But I love being over at the table, and I got to see Anthony. I haven't seen Anthony
Marquez. Yeah.
And that's where I ended up meeting you, because we should tell the story of how we're kind of got to know each other. So you write Bettie Page, Elvira, you know, all of the super kind of goddessy sex symbols, right? And last year I co-wrote the Vampirella issue for Halloween. So we were of both working for Dynamite at the time. And I've been following your career just, you know, along the way. And I just think it's so incredible. So do you want to tell me a little bit about Bettie Page and you know, writing these?
Bettie, I think I have a pretty good relationship with Joe Rybant, who's the senior editor at Dynamite. And I think I'd done 3 series for them. I did a Vampirella, the steampunk Vampirella that's an offshoot of Bill Willingham's Legendary Universe. That was my first comic book ever. And then I did, I can't remember which was, I did Twilight Zone The Shadow, which was a Shadow Twilight Zone mashup, which was, you know, obviously set in 1939. And I wrote after that a Doc Savage, which was set in 38 or 37. So I think Joe thinks of me as a period writer, which I am. And a little bit of context. My dad was a pulp fiction writer, wrote over 200 published novels.
Wow.
Created a series detective character named Ed Noon. The Ed Noon novels start in 1953. And so I think Joe thinks of me as a specialist in that era. And the pulp stuff, like my dad was old enough that I grew up reading The Shadow and Doc Savage, which I think is not necessary. I'm 54, even for my age, that's an unusual, to be that familiar with the characters from the 30s is fairly unusual.
Right.
So I think when the Bettie Page license came up, Joe thought I would be a natural fit for it because of the detective stuff and the noir stuff and the 1950s stuff. And I had a fear, not because of Joe, but just because of exploitation and comic books in general, that it would just be a pretty girl fetishy book. But Joe and I talked about tone and keeping it a little bit light and fun and not self-consciously sexy.
Right.
I watched a documentary called Bettie Page Reveals All, which is narrated by Betty from a long, I think it was a telephone interview with her. And before I started, I read up on her. I watched that doc and I thought, that's a great voice.
Right.
That's an interesting woman. And the thing that really jumps out at me about her, because she has a standard trajectory in the sense of there's a pretty common trajectory, particularly in Hollywood, of people who like do crazy wild stuff, take a lot of drugs, find Jesus, and repent all of it and say, oh, that was terrible. And what I loved about Betty is she was always religious. I'm not religious at all, but she never saw a tension between nude photography. She always said, God gave me this body. It's absurd to think no one should photograph it.
Right.
And that never changed. She never looked back and said, I never should have done all that. And for the 1950s, for a woman to be, if you consider the culture of the time, even the culture of 2019, the combination of her moral rectitude and complete shamelessness about sex and sexuality in her body is so refreshing. And as a 90-year-old woman, or however, I can't remember how old she was when they did the doc right before she died, she's still talking about how great in bed this guy was and how wild this guy was and how great the sex was with, like, she's still, even as a old evangelical Christian, she's still like, oh yeah, the sex was fantastic. Like, there's no, I did the sinful, dirty business with him. It's all very, so.
I love that. I love that the essence of the woman is what you're kind of uncovering. The unabashed, she's not shameful. She's out there. She's living her life. And you get to put that, as a consideration when you're looking at one of these characters. It's not just the sexy image. There's so much more. There's so many layers.
It gave me a character to write. And around the same time, the artist that I've worked with the most, Dave Acosta, he wasn't the artist on, he's not the artist on Betty, but he said something to me. I had been writing comics in a very cinematic style where no captions. Everything was dialogue, sound effects, and visuals. And Dave said to me at one point, let comics be comics, man. Use captions. Don't make your artist tell every single moment of the story.
Right.
And I thought that was incredibly good advice. And so that's where I came up with the idea that the comic was going to be the secret diary of Bettie Page and be narrated by her and allow me to write in that exact voice. And then a bunch of research. I had done a bunch of research about the foundation of, there's a connection between the foundation of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Aleister Crowley's free love Satanist cult, Thelema, and Scientology.
Wow.
It's a funny, crazy story. There's actually a TV show about it now called Strange Angel. But long before Strange Angel came out, I was like, I had done this research for a completely different project. And I was like, let me start the series by dropping Betty in the middle of that.
Right. And
as a result of being involved in those conspiracies, she gets recruited to be an agent of the US government and essentially ends up working for a 1950s version of the X-Files, which is the real life thing was Project Blue Book, which was mostly supposed to debunk UFOs, but I make it so that there's a secret part of Blue Book that's actually fighting alien invaders and, you know, investigating the strange and all of that. So.
Right. That's incredible. I mean, it takes the story to such a different almost genre than what you're expecting when you pick up that book. It's so I love that the idea that you had about writing from her journal, that is brilliant. And it's all,
thank you.
I think it would be a very scary thing to take on because you have to nail that voice and know that character so well to be able to do that. So I was like really just blown away by.
Thank you. She is at 27 in 1951, which is I think the first issue. She's a 27-year-old Southern belle from Tennessee, which is about as far from my 54-year-old Yankee ass as humanly possible. So it required research. I have to say though, I think, you know, a thing that drives me crazy in movies and television and even comic books is anachronisms, and especially in the language, partially because to me, the joy of writing is the music of a language you don't speak naturally.
Right.
I mean, look at the Coen brothers. They do that, I think, more exquisitely than anyone of like, no, the characters should speak the way they spoke in 1951 and not say, let's do lunch, and not say, you know, not use common. It gives you an excuse to use all of this jargon. And the lucky part is my father was from that era. So I have a lot of that jargon imprinted on my brain.
Right.
And I sometimes forget and talk like I'm 80 years old and use a very, very old expression.
That is hilarious.
And have to go like, no, Ray, people don't say that anymore.
I don't know what it is. I grew up with my grandmother and spent a lot of time around her. And I guess I absorbed a lot of her little slang words and stuff that she says. And a lot of my friends say the same thing about me. They're like,
yeah,
nobody says like the bee's knees, or nobody says whatever, you know, like ridiculous little thing that pops in my mouth. And I feel like I've just taken to that era a little bit.
Yeah, and like I said, the music is of that language is interesting to me.
Yeah.
As an aside, I have the project with Eastman.
Yes, I want to hear all about this Kickstarter.
We'll back into that, but what relates to what we're talking about now, because it's a comic book set in the world of comic books, every fictional character in it who's a comic book creator, we've had to create comics for them to have created.
Right.
In the 4th issue of Drawing Blood, he meets a young comics creator named Amanda Cavallina at New York Comic Con, strangely enough. And
so meta. I love it.
She has created a character called GTFO Girl. And she's supposed to be maybe 20 years old.
Right.
Tattoos, colored hair, the whole thing. And, you know, I consider myself a perfectly good and versatile writer. But when we came to that character and doing a spin-off using that character, using GTFO Girl, because, okay, what does Amanda Cavallina's comic book look like? What does the GTFO Girl webcomic look like? I thought, you know what? I don't want to write that. And I don't think the amount of time and research I would have to do to write a comic that I think a 19-year-old girl in 2019 would write, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I feel more like a fraud doing that than a 27-year-old in 1951, where at least I understand 1951 or 1952.
More authentic.
So Amanda Debert Staggs is actually writing.
Oh.
She wrote a 4-page web series, and we're now choosing an artist for it.
Right.
But we will soft launch that as a backup in one of the Drawing Blood Volume 2 comics. The other spin-offs I can handle, but that one I was like, you know, let's let a young woman who understands young women in a way that I am not really capable of understanding, do that. And, you know, Amanda Debert is not 17 years old, but she is far closer to that world and understanding it and understanding, you know, she's been a teenage girl in the 20th century and the 21st. I have not. So And part of adapting to what success looks like is other people running with your stuff. And even in the tiny world of Bettie Page, you know, I've created a universe for her with supporting characters. And the thing that absolutely thrilled me is the Halloween specials, the 2019 and the 2018 Halloween specials, had 8-page backups.
Right.
The first one was written by Leah Williams, and the second one was written by Erica Schultz. Both great, both fun. And they both used her friendship. She has a best friend who's an African-American fellow agent, ex-police officer named Lissa Druk. They both wrote Betty and Lissa stories.
Wow.
And that made me proud, honestly, because I have gotten that friendship right. If these young women, when they look at those comics and go, okay, what will I spin off from here? They both went, Betty and Lissa together, having a good time out on the town. Both of them are about Betty and Lissa going out on the town and having a good time. And I was like, at some level, I definitely succeeded if these two very different young women responded to the friendship created in the comic book.
Right.
You know.
Well, going back to that idea that you had, which I thought was so interesting about, you know, how you didn't feel comfortable maybe putting yourself into that young woman's character, or like it wasn't going to ring true or authentic to you. I mean, I found that is so interesting because, you know, I'm just working on Nora's saga right now. And I had a bunch of questions recently, and people were like, well, why did you feel that you could write this kind of young teenage girl who's going on this adventure? And I really found it interesting because I'm raising a tween right now. So like my daily living experience is dealing with this day in and day out.
Sure.
And obviously, you know, way back in the day, I was a teen. So, you know, I feel like that's something that I relate closely to. But
Sure.
I've also had the opportunity to write like male assassins, or, you know, something that's kind of like stepping outside of my comfort zone, but that I really felt like when I put all the research in, that I could really gravitate towards those characters. Mm-hmm. But there are some where you just feel like this is outside of maybe what I can either make it come off authentically, or it's not going to be something that I feel like I can lend myself to. So, but I'm just interested because I remember Christopher Priest did an article about this in an interview, and he was saying, you know, he was getting, I guess, people asking him about why he wanted to write Vampirella, and he was saying the same thing, that there's so many great characters out there to write, and as a writer, it's your job, it's your, you know, privilege to be able to explore all of these options and do the research and find that voice.
Absolutely. And look, if Marvel came to me tomorrow and said, Kitty Pryde miniseries set, you know, in the present day, and she's 19.
It's like, go.
Yes, I'm going to subscribe to Teen Vogue and find out how to write a present day 19-year-old.
Yeah.
But partially, the Amanda Cavallina character in Drawing Blood is actually, this is I think a big motivation of why I didn't want to write it too. The whole character is introduced as Drawing Blood is about a white middle-aged dude in a career impasse.
Right.
Something me and Kevin have both felt. When he meets this young woman at convention, he's wearing a Miyazaki mask. He's wearing a mask, and he says, oh, do you like the ragdolls? And she says, oh yeah, they were great, but those guys are total corporate sellouts now. They let, you know, our in-universe version of Nickelodeon,
right,
it's called Kiddyscope, I think. They let Kiddyscope buy their asses, and they're all frauds and losers now, and blah, 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 blah. And he picks up the mask to look at something, and she says, oh my God, I can't believe I said that to you. And he says, oh no, I'm a fraud and a sellout. Don't, you know, you're not wrong. And he has a publishing company called Siberian Arts, which is an analog to Kevin's Tundra. And he says, I think I want to publish this comic. And she says, well, I can't believe you want to do it. He says, look, I started this to give new voices, young voices a chance. And it's become this clearinghouse of white middle-aged dudes who did their best work when, you know, Bill Clinton was president, and maybe we need something fresh and new. So I thought it would be particularly stupid for me to write the comic that's by the character who's the new voice.
Exactly.
That the character, like no, that would make me a huge hypocrite to write that character, which is all about getting a different voice. So I've been very conscious since I started drawing blood, right, that me and Kevin are a type.
Right.
We're a generation. We're a type. Our artist Ben is considerably younger, but he's also, he's a big Ninja Turtles fan.
Right.
I wanted someone not from our enclosed universe to come into the product, to come into the franchise, for want of a better word, and have a voice that wasn't me.
I think that's a great idea too, to diversify your entire experience and creative team. So there's different perspectives. Now, how have you found this opportunity of doing the crowdfunding and the publishing on your own? What kind of experience has that been for you?
Well, I love that tweet I think it was started on Twitter, where you said the third publisher isn't, it's Marvel, DC, and Kickstarter. And I 100% agree. And how it started was, it's a little bit of a torturous thing, but Kevin had this semi-autobiographical idea he'd been kicking around. And he said to me, it's called On the Shoulders of Giants. It's a terrible title. Come up with something better. And it was based somewhat on his, obviously the skeleton of it is his experiences creating the Ninja Turtles.
Right.
But as he likes to say, and this is true, it's every show business comic book anecdote both of us have heard in the last 30 years. Like, it's not 35 years. It's not a one-for-one, this character is this person and this character is this person. And they're all, even Shane Bookman. It's impossible for Shane to be just Kevin. Shane's got to be Kevin and me, and even some Ben Bishop who draws him. Here is a super important aside about what happens next.
Tell me.
We are comic book people who love to make comic books. The number of people since I did my crowdfunding and it was successful who have come to me and said, I have a pilot script and I've never been able to sell it. Tell me about making it a comic book. And I say, it's more expensive than you think it is, and it's way too much work. If what you're creating, I always say, you're going to spend months of your life and a lot of money to create a leave behind in a pitch meeting. Don't do that.
Don't do that.
You love comic books, and you're going to be happy with the comic book. Because one of the things I've learned from working with Kevin, he has always had the ability to say no from the very beginning, because he's owned his own shit.
Right.
Since '84. If you tried to make a deal with him for a movie or a TV show or any other friend or a toy, he can look at your toy design and go, nope.
Wow.
Don't like it. Don't need to do it. Now, he sold off his interest in the Turtles a decade and a half ago, longer. But the point being, if you're going to create a comic book, you'd better love the comic book and be willing to pour your heart and soul into the comic book and not see it as the redheaded bastard stepchild of your TV show.
Right.
So when we started making the comic, like as an example, the first 4 issues of Drawing Blood, about page 10 of the 3rd issue is where we're out of the pilot script. And you know what? I enjoyed writing everything from there on in so much more because I'm writing a comic book. I'm not trying to, in a TV script, the scenes where he's face to face with the Lithuanian gangsters, there's 5 minutes of hilarious dialogue in the script. That had to become 2 pages.
2 pages, right.
10 panels. And I'm telling you, 5 pages of brilliant dialogue does not go into 10 panels. About a page of brilliant dialogue goes into 10 panels. So that part of it was brutal, but also just making the pieces fit together and making the cliffhangers at every 22 pages rather than where they would come in a television script. It was such a relief to have the TV show script behind me and to not feel like I had to reflect it in any way anymore and to just be writing the comic book. And now I'm writing volume 2.
And have you guys been surprised or just thrilled with the receptance and the way people have loved it?
It's been I think we knew the challenges and the Kevin has an enormous worldwide fan base.
Mhm.
The Turtles have an enormous worldwide fan base. That's the good news. The bad news is what they love is funny animals fighting crime.
Right.
So basically, the pitch for Drawing Blood is, you love Bugs Bunny, here's Fellini's 8.5.
Yeah.
You're going to love this. You like Darkwing Duck, well, here we have all that jazz.
Right.
Exactly the kind of thing that you adore. So obviously,
the crossover is
convincing them that, so Kevin and I both decided early on that we needed to pay attention to the in-universe, the radically rearranged Ronin Ragdolls, because that would be the way in
for all the fans.
The thing that's the Turtles pastiche.
Right.
And sometimes people are surprised that there are 3 of them instead of 4, and they're named after animation directors instead of a different set of Renaissance painters. I'm like, I reread the first 10 Mirage issues when we were working, and I have remembered them pretty well. But we very much wanted to create something that worked all on its own.
Right.
And I didn't feel any responsibility to go, well, because the Turtles are friends with an adult lady person, I need to give them an adult lady. There's a character who's 8 years old who may one day be their Casey Jones, but right now he's an 8-year-old orphan kid. He's not Casey Jones.
Right.
There's, their mentor is not another animal. Their mentor is a 65-year-old Japanese lady who runs a sushi restaurant in Queens. And they're Japanese in a way that the Turtles aren't, but they're also not Japanese in the way that the Turtles are, if that makes any sense.
You have those similar kind of ringtones to kind of guide everybody through the story, and they can feel that sense of reminiscence.
But if you've never read a Turtles comic in your life, you will not feel lost or confused by the Ragdolls. It's just a thing that exists all by itself, and it's and I fell in love with them writing them. I love they're sort of accidentally based on my cats. I have 3 cats. There are 3 Ragdolls. I didn't push the design elements of the Ragdolls at all, but somehow they ended up kind of all looking like my cats, which is nice.
Right.
But all that said, so like when we started out, we felt that we would definitely be able to do okay on Kickstarter with Kevin's fans and with my friends and fans and family and all that. And we had an initial goal of $75,000 for a 4-issue trade.
Right.
And then the stretch goal of the 32-page oversized Ragdolls origin issue. And that was all very intentional in that, and that was for $100,000. Because we knew that even people that maybe weren't so interested in the All That Jazz set in comic books midlife crisis book, they really wanted us to get to that free cats fighting crime book, so they put in. I like to think that's, they read Drawing Blood and went, oh, hey, this is pretty good. But we made 106 out of $100,000.
That's fantastic. That's amazing.
We put out the book to the fans, and then we sort of, following the model that you're supposed to follow, we went around to publishers and said, look at this thing we created that's great and people like it. And the offers we got from traditional publishers, let me put it this way, they weren't good enough that we even made counter offers. We just went, and I'm not talking about Hole in the Wall Comics Incorporated. I'm talking about Big Two, and we didn't go to the Big Two, but we went to right under the Big Two.
Wow.
And didn't sometimes they just said, oh yeah, we're very interested, and then we never heard from them again. But the actual offers that were made, we went, that's terrible. And the value of being published by Dark Horse, Image, IDW, Dynamite is very simple. Previews is a fucking telephone book.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're an indie comic creator, you're in the Z's.
Right.
When in the yellow pages, you know, companies, you know, AAA insurance, you know, like, so that you're the first one and people call you.
Yeah.
The comic shop owner has to dig deep in the weeds to find your little tiny thing this big
Right.
about your indie comic book. We did make a deal with Previews so that the first issue of Drawing Blood, when it premiered in Previews, they did a 4-page interview with Kevin, but the 4-page interview with Kevin was still in the back of the phone book.
No.
So you still had to go digging for it. And yeah, in the contents, it said interview with Kevin Eastman, but then 500 pages later. So that's as far as I'm concerned, the only thing dealing with a company as opposed to self-publishing gets you.
Right.
The bug in the upper left-hand corner, and you're further up in the phone book. That's it.
Well, now there is such a platform for everyone to do crowdfunding themselves, and there's so much, public support. Mm-hmm. I was surprised at how many people are willing to, like you said, you know, maybe you're doing cross genre or something, but they're willing to follow you to that new platform or that new story idea and support you. And it's so wonderful. I really like the interaction too with friends and fans. I feel like it's a different feeling when you can do it directly.
Absolutely. And
marketing.
And they are absolutely invested in your success in a way that they wouldn't be if they walked into a store and bought it.
Exactly.
And not just because you're talking to them on social media, which of course you are, and not just, you know, some people pay to have their name in the comic, to be a cameo in the background. The funny thing is, a guy paid us, he wanted himself and his little baby child to be in Drawing Blood. And then he saw the first issue of Drawing Blood, which we released digitally. He's like, I can't show this to my kid. There's nudity, there's violence, there's cursing. And I was like, oh, we haven't finished Ragdolls yet. Let's just draw you into Ragdolls. And he was like, oh,
yeah.
We didn't want to just say, hey, sorry, Charlie, this is what you paid for.
Right.
We found a way to put him in something, but yeah, the direct contact with the fans is good. And, you know, I will say Dynamite. So long story short, we self-published Drawing Blood. We took the 4 chapters from the floppies and from the trade and put them out as floppies through the Diamond system.
Right.
Totally. And I got to say, there is something wonderful about selling comics in comic stores with zero financial risk.
Right.
Because you don't have to print anything that hasn't been ordered.
Yeah.
You know, you're out of pocket until Diamond pays you, which is a few months.
Right.
But we had enough left over from Kickstarters and things and stuff as ridiculous as T-shirt sales to buoy us and we had some help with that. But once we got over that hump, and I will say, I don't know if it sold a single comic book, but Dynamite very kindly, I reached out to them and said, hey, we'll put a Dynamite ad about my Dynamite comics in every issue of Drawing Blood and the Ragdolls if you put a Drawing Blood Ragdolls ad in every Dynamite issue I write. And they said, sure. So we did an ad swap. What's funny is I picked up a Red Sonja of Vampirella, and it also had the Drawing Blood ad in it. And I asked my editor, Kevin Kettner, about it. And he said, oh, yeah, our production department, if something runs a page short, they're just going to grab something. And sometimes it's going to be your ad. So I was like, great. So like I said, I don't know that sold us any issues, but there are ways to penetrate other markets with it.
Now, how have you found, is there somebody in comics or some type of project that you're really excited to work on in the future? Some different type of writing you want to explore? Or is there someone in particular, like an artist you're excited to work on?
I mean, I got to say, the 2 gentlemen doing my monthly comics, I literally can't. They're so good. I don't think about aiming. There is no higher to aim. Dave Acosta, who does Elvira.
Right.
And Elvira has been very picky about, God bless her, she's very kind to me in my scripts. She's been very picky about cover artists. We have burned through a few very talented, high-name artists who she was like, man, no, I don't like it. But Dave Acosta, she loves him. She loves every panel and every book.
Oh,
and
good.
He's so great. And he's the artist I've worked with the most. So we have a great working relationship, and we're very much on the same. He's considerably younger, but we have the same cultural touchstones to the degree that I introduced Faust, the historical Faust, as a villain in Elvira. And before I could even say to him, there's a terrible Richard Burton movie where Richard Burton plays Faust, so I'd like you to draw Richard Burton, the old British movie star, as Faust. He literally texted me a picture of Richard Burton from the Faust movie. He said, like this, right? I'm like,
you guys are on the same wavelength there. That's
my favorite thing, but there's an issue of Elvira, issue 4 of Elvira. She's in a 1935 movie studio, and there's nothing but celebrity 1930s cameos, pastiches of William Powell and Mariner Loy as the Thin Rat Man, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, Gary Cooper, John Wayne, all that. And there's a scene at the end where the director of Bride of Frankenstein shows up with a couple of studio security guards. And I just said to security guards, I didn't describe them, I didn't say anything. When I got the pages, it was Abbott and Costello.
Oh my gosh, that's so perfect.
I fell out of my chair. I was like, that is so fucking funny.
Yeah.
And I went back and looked up their character names from Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein and added that to the dialogue. Chick and Wilbur. So now they're calling out to each other while Dracula's throwing them around. But so Dave is great, and Julius Oda, who does Bettie Page, is a revelation. He captures her beautifully. He's great with action. Ben Bishop on Drawing Blood is an amazing artist and a great collaborator. And as an aside, really great at Kickstarter. I'm glad that it wasn't a couple of middle-aged guys doing the Kickstarter by ourselves, because I don't know if we would have done half as well.
That's great.
I mean, there are people out there. It's funny, I meet more writers than I do artists, and I don't think about co-writing a lot. But there are projects that I definitely had there. I've been toying around with a historical narrative about Ulysses S. Grant. And I ran into a writer I love and a beautiful human being, David Walker, at New York City Comic Con. And I picked up his Frederick Douglass graphic novel, which is incredible. And he actually said, if you're serious about a Ulysses Grant graphic novel, I'm pretty sure a publisher who wanted to publish my Frederick Douglass book would be interested in another Civil War. So I'm going to pursue that. And there's one other, I haven't settled on an artist for it yet, but my father was a World War II veteran and a great storyteller. And I have a half-written script to do something with this. When I was a little boy, the bedtime stories he told me all the classic fairy tales. As World War II combat stories starring him. So like Little Red Riding Hood takes place in 1940s Belgium. And at the end, instead of the hunters, it's my father's reconnaissance patrol kicking down the door and shooting the wolf. And I think they're kind of
for a little kid going to sleep there.
Yeah. And the three little pigs, the wolf is in a tank shooting the straw house, and that it's just, there's something to me really funny and appealing about that. It's a little bit like Willingham's Fables. I'm kind of glad that that series is done so that we're further from any comparison with that. But I think the World War II angle with that, and I think it gains something from the fact that it's absolutely true. It's something, this is how I heard, I mean, literally like Sleeping Beauty was like, so, my patrol goes into this small town and there's this chick in a glass box. It was very sort of ridiculous and fun. So I'll do something with that someday.
I think that would be incredible.
And Betty and Elvira is going to wrap up in issue 12. I think 10 is coming out in a couple of weeks. Bettie Page Unbound is going to wrap up at 10, I think. 5 comes out today, and I've written up to 7 or 8. And then we're going to reboot those series with new number ones, because Dynamite loves them a number 1. And I have some. Well, so the sneak preview is the new Bettie Page I want to do. I just think it's such an obvious joke, is Bettie Page and Vampirella, and I'm hoping they go for that. And literally the first scene is a beauty salon in 1952, and Vampirella is getting a haircut, and Bettie Page comes in, sits down next to her, and goes, "Nice bangs."
That'd be good.
They both have the same haircut, and I'm kind of obsessed with that. I think that's really kind of funny. Same thing with Veronica from the Archie. Like, I feel like Veronica from Archie and Vampirella are people drawing Bettie Page unofficially, and not admitting it. So I would love to do Bettie Page meets Betty and Veronica. Would also be great.